rambunctious art sluts. It's Allison Moon, and you're listening to a new episode of the Artgasm podcast. On today's episode, I interview Tina Horn, one of my favorite humans, and also one of my favorite creators of sex-positive media in general. And I talked to her mostly about her new comic book, the new trade paperback of the collected issues of her first run at her comic called Safe Sex, or also SFSX. I really recommend checking out this comic book. We have a great interview that's pretty in-depth, but we don't spoil things really. But I think this interview is special to me because not only is Tina a friend, but I think I've watched her in this field of a sex educator and a sex worker who has been making more fiction, making more stories. And this is something that I've also been, my ambitions have been placed in as well for a while. As much as I love teaching sex ed, and I don't intend to stop anytime soon, my heart really is in stories that are driven through eroticism and sex, where sex is part of the story and education can come out of that. But I think this is what Safe Sex does so well as well, because this comic stars sex workers and it talks a lot about labor issues around sex work, but in a way that is so clear that Tina understands what she's talking about. And I think one of the frustrations that I have as a sex writer and sex educator when I watch any sort of media where sex and eroticism is the point is I get really annoyed when I see things that are done wrong, because so many things are done wrong. And unlike, hilarious surgery in a medical show or bad police work in a cop show, nobody's going out and, doing police work or doing surgery because of what they see on TV. But that's not the case with sex. With sex, and also with sex work rights, and with queer rights, and with anything that has to do with sex, so many people get their information from fiction. And a lot of the people who are writing these TV shows, these movies, a lot of the people who are the creators of these products don't actually have firsthand knowledge about those communities that they're serving or the communities that they're representing. And what makes Safe Sex so different is that Tina Horn knows her shit when it comes to sex work, and it makes the entire comic reading experience so much more entertaining, so much more thoughtful, and so much more complex. The issues that are facing these sex workers are not like, do I want to quote unquote sell my body or not? Or the moral issues of having sex for money. Those are so retrograde in terms of questions. Those are so simplistic in terms of the questions that sex workers are actually dealing with, and the people who support sex workers are also engaging with, that I think this comic book, it just stands head and shoulders above other works that try to explore sex work but are done and created by people who have no idea what they're talking about. So I think it's really lovely to just engage with this, and then also to read something that, again, I say as I open the interview, talks about nostalgia, because this takes place in San Francisco, and it's kind of in the San Francisco that is dying, quote unquote, in its treatment of sex and sex work and sex entertainment, in the same way that San Francisco's kind of dying right now around that. So many of our spaces, so many of our sex culture has been lost, and is continuing to be lost. If you have been with the podcast for a while, you remember me interviewing Carol Queen in season 1. Carol Queen, who created and ran the Center for Sex and Culture for many years with her partner Robert Lawrence, and collected ephemera from San Francisco's sexual history, from flyers for bathhouses to zines to erotica to posters to everything. I mean, anything you can imagine being associated with the history of sex in San Francisco, the Center for Sex and Culture was a part of. And of course, the physical location of the Center for Sex and Culture disbanded last year because of that increasing gentrification and techification of San Francisco. And talking to Tina, Tina and I met when we both lived in the Bay Area. So having this conversation with her, as it did remind me a lot of this kind of heyday of what it meant when we were, filming porn in my loft in Oakland. And now that I live in Portland and she lives elsewhere, made me feel a lot of nostalgia for cities. And I think it also kind of speaks to this moment of COVID where so many people are creating think pieces about how New York is dead and will never come back, and San Francisco is dying and will never come back. But so I was talking about like what actually makes a city, what actually makes a sex culture, and what attracts people to be where they are, and how we connect and how we find ourselves having quote unquote safe sex in a time when even sharing a physical space with another human being is on the unsafe side of things. It's fascinating. So because it's such a long interview, I'm just going to cut to the chase and introduce you to Tina. But before we get to that, one quick thing. If you enjoy this podcast and would like to support it, please do become a Patreon subscriber at patreon.com. That's patreon.com/artgasm. And also follow me on the social medias. I'm on Twitter at HeyAliMoon, and you can find me online on artgasmcast.com. And then, of course, Tina Horn's going to drop all of her URLs and social media stuff at the end of this interview. So without further ado, please allow me to introduce you to Tina Horn. Tina Horn, thanks so much for joining me. This is so nice.
Oh, it is so nice. I am happy to, quote, be here.
Where are we? Anywhere?
What is being? What is time? What is space?
It's meaningless.
It always was.
It's true. Now we just actually see it. We are seeing the Matrix, finally.
Oh, God.
Anyway, hi. It's so nice to talk to you. It's always nice to talk to you. I miss you. And whenever I talk to you, I have this wash of nostalgia. It's actually, that's a nice little segue into. So what I really want to talk to you about today is your comic series, Safe Sex /SFSX.
I know. I'm sorry. It's hard to say it out loud, but then it's hard to say SFSX out loud, but it's really hard to Google safe sex and find my comic. So we I don't know. I kind of made that overwrought and complicated, but I don't know, maybe that makes it memorable.
It's important, just like finding a good sex work client relation. It's like jumping through a couple hoops is usually a good sign, right? If you're willing to accommodate our needs.
Thank you for speaking my language. Yes, my boundary is that you need to struggle a bit with pronouncing the name of my book. You can say safe sex if you want to say it out loud. And yeah, the first trade paperback collection of the first 7 issues is now available wherever books and comic books are sold, and you can either find it by saying SFSX or typing SFSX or typing safe sex, saying safe sex, or saying volume 1 protection, or usually probably best also to use my name, which is Tina Horn, or the name of any of the artists that are that have been involved in the series so far, like Jen Hickman and Michael Dowling and Alejandro Gutierrez and Steve Wands and Lauren McCubbin and a bunch of others. And it's published.
See, no one has any excuses about not being able to find your work now.
Exactly.
Now you've given us a bevy of resources.
No, I'm fucking out there, man.
You are out there. I feel like you're probably out there thematically as well for Image Comics and for comic books in general.
I guess so. Apparently, no. I mean, Image is a great fit for my sensibility and my aesthetics, and being a creator at Image is like running a small business, which is something that I'm very used to. And while I like the opportunity in the various mediums that I work in to be talent and to have a talent contract, or to show up and have everybody staying in their lane, and I don't have to be one queer band with every single fucking thing that I do. I love that, and it's very relaxing, and sometimes I have to stop myself from topping from the bottom and just be you are talent, so sometimes you find me in the corner just rocking back and forth and repeating to myself, you're the talent. I'm ultimately most comfortable sort of running everything and running every aspect, and understanding how every aspect of the whole ecosystem of the comics industry works. And, there are a ton of really out there comics series on Image, and part of that is that they are really hands off in the creative and editorial department, and they just let you like make whatever wacky thing you want to make and that you think might sell, and then they give you a chance to put it out there with the Image brand in the direct market. And with Safe Sex, that has really, the proof has been in the pudding. The people want their sex safe.
Yeah.
Just kidding, there's a lot of dangerous sex in the comic book series Safe Sex.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's what is so nice, like reading, because I know you, right? Like reading this comic book, it feels like, I actually had a very much experience of like reading your old zines. Like it didn't feel like there were a number of editorial filters. I mean, there may have certainly been editorial guidance and editorial zhuzhing, but ultimately it felt like I was reading Tina Horn's work. And I
Oh,
think that's
that's
such
so
a,
nice.
yeah, no, it's a blessing, because I think that we hear so many horror stories of creators who have been like watered down, especially when we talk about sex or sex work, where you have to kind of file the edges off in order to fit into the box that a publishing company wants from you. And it's so refreshing to hear stories like that, where you're like, no, 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 like this is me, this is the project that I wanted to create, and they supported me, and that's just, that feels nice to hear.
Totally. And, which isn't to say that, like, there was a lot of editorial process, and there was in the creation of Safe Sex, and there was a lot of, there was a learning curve for me in terms of learning to write fiction and learning to write in the comics medium and learning to write scripts for artists, and then learning to go through the whole process of, like, sending a script to the artist and then getting layouts back and giving notes on that, and then getting pencils back and giving notes on that, and then getting inks and then colors and then proofing and doing the lettering, and like all of these different stages. There was a lot of craft and discipline and just general stuff for me to learn within this medium. But like, it was definitely the version of that where that structure, that discipline, that collaboration was set up for everyone to shine in the way that they want to shine, and to like
Mhm.
to be, to sort of like have, I always compare it to BDSM, where you negotiate desires and boundaries. And actually, this can be true of any kind of sex. It doesn't have to be kinky, right? You have that, and you talk about this a lot in your work, like how to have those structural conversations around boundaries and desires, and that sort of ironically, you actually are more free to
Mhm.
express yourself and to connect with people when when you've had those explicit conversations, and you feel held by that structure. So that's
Yeah.
definitely what the creative process of making comics has been like for me.
Yeah, it adds a layer of feeling safe enough to kind of push yourself to the limits, knowing that the space, the container, and the other people will hold that for you. It's a great metaphor. I definitely feel that way when you find a good editor. It's like
Totally.
you feel like you're not going to be judged for the content or for your angle on the content, but you might be judged for your syntax. And like I feel fine. Like judge me for my syntax, but don't tell me that I'm a slut for or a bad slut for doing certain things. I think it's an interesting way of framing it.
Totally.
So, what do you feel like is the biggest learning curve part for you in just coming from the creative nonfiction world into comic book writing?
I think that the biggest learning curve. Okay, have you seen the movie Adaptation?
Sure.
Okay, so I just did an Adaptation rewatch,
Hmm.
and like, I um so my favorite movie of all time is Being John Malkovich, which was the first movie that Charlie Kaufman wrote and Spike Jonze directed, and then the second
Hmm.
one that they did together was Adaptation. It came out in 2002. If people are listening to this and they haven't seen Adaptation, like, get your life together. Like what else are you doing? I think it's my favorite Meryl Streep performance actually, which is like really
Oh
fucking
yeah.
saying something. But anyway, so I did a rewatch of that, and like, without giving too much of the movie away for those who haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. But one of the sort of central conflicts of the movie is between these twin brothers who, in this like very hilarious meta textual construction, are like fictional versions of the actual screenwriter who does not have a twin brother. And so like the Charlie Kaufman character is very like intellectual, as a writer, and very, just like focused on like putting in the process and like making himself miserable, like sacrificing like everything else in his life to just like make the most like interesting art possible. And then his twin brother, whose name is Donald, they're both played by Nick Cage. um Donald like starts taking a screenwriting workshop from this like sort of self-help guru who claims to have like all of the, sort of story beats that you have to hit in order to like just follow this formula, and then you'll write a like entertaining successful screenplay. And so they kind of are, they're always having this conflict between like the sort of left brain right brain like craft technique versus like intellectual artistic freedom, and then the sort of like cynical commercial formulaic sellout type stuff that we were like taught to fear so much in the 90s. And then like versus like the true creative spirit, yada yada yada. Anyway, after rewatching this, I really just reminded me of the way that I'm so ACDC about everything. I'm so bisexual about everything. I'm like totally equal parts Charlie and Donald Kaufman. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
there's so a part of me that like when someone's like, put your story outline into this structure and make sure you hit all of these beats. I'm like, I love a prompt. Give me a
Yeah.
prompt. A prompt like makes my like brain, makes all my synapses fire, and it like gets my blood boiling, and it just like totally like gets me motivated, and then like all the juices flowing, and then I've like made the satisfying thing. And then there's absolutely also a part of me that is like a fucking like morose, overly conceptual, overly intellectual, like pomo homo, that is just like, I just have to sit here uh like suffering, in order to like tap into this like wellspring of creativity deep inside me, and like all of that shit is bullshit, and if you follow it, then you like are no longer in touch with like your fucking muse or whatever, so all of this is to say that like I've struggled with that in like, this is my first time writing fiction. It's my first time writing sort of like commercial entertainment, because that's the other element of all of this as well, right? Is like, are you an artist just to be an artist, or like if you are a professional artist and you do have to think about money, and you do have, that means that you also have to think about deadlines, and it also means that you
Mm-hmm.
have to think about answering to editors and producers and publishers and collaborators, and like learning how to do that in comics, I guess, has been like my biggest learning curve. And I think I've maybe just accepted that I'm never gonna settle on just one, that it is about that I'm never gonna settle on like the one true path is like hitting these 15 story beats, and that I'm just gonna like be a content mill, and that's what I do for work. It's like, I think I'm always gonna be like switching back and forth between those polarities.
Mm.
But it has definitely been, writing comics has been one of, if not the most rewarding mediums and industries to do that work in, partially because I don't know. I mean, there's like we were just talking about this before we started recording, like because you're making something that is built for mass entertainment, I mean, there's just kind of like more. I'm sure that people would contradict me, and maybe I just sound like a total fucking naive little Pollyanna, but it feels like the role of the writer in the field of fiction and entertainment is like more valued than journalism and publishing in the
Mm.
21st century anyway, like because
Hmm.
I just felt like there was a limit to how much my work was going to be valued over time in a way that could make like a sustainable career in writing true stories. So I decided to start making them up.
That's it. I mean, that's a really interesting point. The idea of, I mean, the position of the writer, and it's always like it just galled me that like, there's no playwrights Tony, right? Like, there's no the when you do a
There's
movie
no
review.
there's no Tony for writing.
No, no, you no. They left that on the table.
How
They
am I have to like turn in my homosexual card that I did not know that.
No, it's I actually I learned it recently too because it just didn't really occur to me, which again I'm kind of ashamed of as a person who likes writing plays. Like it's galling, but yeah, there are other awards you can win, and you can win best play, but that's a producer's award. But
Right.
yeah, the actual script is not rewarded in the Tonys. Um, and same thing like with film reviews, you'll often they'll credit so many people, but they'll rarely, unless the writing is particularly unique, credit the writer. And there's this weird, and something that you probably know as as you venture into other kind of forms of screenwriting, like there's no like the chain of command of like somebody will write a script and then they'll sell it, and then they'll hire, the producers will hire a bunch of other writers to rewrite it. And so there's a series of writers that will often work. Pretty much any movie you see in a cinema, or when we can go back to cinemas, will have been written by a number of different people.
Totally.
um, and
Some of them credited and some of them not.
yeah, exactly. And so it's like, well, and there's a series of arbitration is what it's called, when they like legally define who is the writer and maybe who created it versus who wrote it. It's just a really wacky system of crediting writers. And so I think it's just a strange thing to think of, like so many the stories would not exist without people to write them. And at the same time, writers have this very strange relationship depending on their genre with exaltation or complete erasure.
Mm.
And I think it's really, I mean, kind of like back to your comment about comics, it's so nice to like see your name front and center. It's like it's you, like this is your brainchild, and it feels so exalting in that way, in some where so many genres kind of minimize the contribution of the writer, as ironic as that is.
Yeah, totally. That is really cool to think about. I mean, something that I've definitely something that I have learned. So I've like been a comics fan my whole life, and so I definitely came into the industry with a good understanding of the history of a lot of different parts of the medium, from superhero stuff to more kind of uh like horror and sci-fi and fantasy, to the like really wacky obscene underground stuff as well. And I, you know, when I was developing Safe Sex, I was developing it, as the creator, and as people listening to this might know, the story of safe sex and the world of safe sex is very much based on worlds that I live in and cultures that I have been a part of and I'm still a part of, and like also a lot of politics that I'm engaged in my nonfiction work. And whether it's like writing articles for Rolling Stone or like my podcast, which is called Why Are People Into That. And so like there definitely came a point where like bringing an artist into the project, it was like, okay, so now you guys are the co-creators. And I was like, whoa, 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 whoa. Like this person, this artist like did not actually help develop this story, and it's like
Mhm.
not their world. So like, yes, I value, and then there was this kind of
Mhm.
pushback of like, well, there's this debate in the comics world of like, writers getting all of the credit for being creators and artists being
Hmm.
undervalued. And I was like, let me be very clear. I absolutely value the work that the visual artists are doing. I am extremely aware of the fact that comics is like, not to put too fine a point on it, but like comics are a medium that cannot exist without the visuals. Um
Hmm.
and but it's more than just there's words and there's pictures. It's
Right.
about like the synergy of the words and pictures working together. So like I absolutely want to value not only the artist but also like what the sort of like frisson of like what happens in the like in the collaboration between
Hmm.
artist and writer. But like this, like from the beginning, like Safe Sex was not a project that was developed with a writer and artist coming together and saying, let's make this world together.
Hmm.
And so, um, it was really, and you mentioned like the legality of all of this stuff. Like it was very important to me in like getting my first entertainment lawyer, which is like, I never, that's something that I've learned from making comics. I've never learned to love lawyers as much. I fucking love my lawyer. Her name is Caitlin D'Amata, and um, she has like taught me to fish, so to speak, and also like has been there for me where like I'll be in a situation where I'm like, this doesn't seem quite right, and I'll get her
Hmm.
on the phone and I'll be like, what do you think this isn't right? And she's like, no, I totally agree with you, and here's how we can put that in legalese in your contract. So I hope
Hmm.
nobody like thinks this is boring, because I find it very exciting, because like this is the these are the systems of power that are influencing like what stories get told and how stories
Hmm.
get told, and like has who has control over stories and who has certain say so. All of this is to say, through all of this process, I've now gotten to the point where I am working. I'm working with artists that I can like have this kind of ongoing collaborative process with, where now when I'm writing scripts like for the next sort of season, the next volume, the next story arc of Safe Sex, I'm writing directly to the artist that I'm working with now, Jen
Hmm.
Hickman, and we have a clear understanding of like, if Jen and I ever decide to like create a comic together, then we'll be co-creators and we'll, be making executive decisions together, and we'll be sharing equity. But for now, like we have a clear relationship where I'm the writer and I'm also the creator, and we're not
Hmm.
taking it for granted that because I'm the writer that makes me the creator. Like
Hmm.
the creator is kind of like as much as anything else, it's like a legal term.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
And if Jen wanted to say to me, or if Lauren McCubbin, who is my editor and designer now, wanted to say to me, I don't really think that this story would go in this direction, or I don't think that that character would do that, or like I don't think this is the right tone, or that thing that you said in the press, the thing that you said on this like one podcast, like I really think misrepresents this project. Like I'm totally down to listen to that, and
Hmm.
also it's like ultimately up to me, and that's a
Well,
nice
and
feeling.
that's thing, and then in that, like, there's a certain freedom as an artist. Like, sometimes an artist does absolutely want to be part of the initial collaboration, but sometimes they just want to like do their work, collect their check, and then like move on to the next. Actually, I mean, this is interestingly example. Like on Girl Sex 101, like I worked with Katie Diamond as the illustrator, and like I was very, like, we had these conversations at the beginning of like what kind of creative relationship do we want here, and she was pretty clear. She's like, I just want you to like buy my art. I'll do all the art, and like the Girl Sex 101 would not look the way it does without Katie's incredible creative input and incredible creative designs. And at the same time, like she very much wanted to be able to like walk away and then move on to the next project. And I think that like that there's a freedom in that I think needs to be honored as well. That like the as you as creator hold
a lot of the power, but also a lot of the responsibility, such that you can speak on behalf of the story, and your artists are free to not have to bear that responsibility in the same way. And so sometimes people will want that. Sometimes that's
Totally.
exactly the kind of relationship that they want. And then sometimes it will be, you want a pure creative collaboration, and that's a whole other level of discussion.
Totally. And that's the thing that is really cool about working with Image is that, yeah, it's totally up to the creative team to decide that. And it's true. I mean, I have no resentment towards anyone in on my team for the fact that, like, I'm the one doing the spreadsheets, I'm the one sending out the 1099s, I'm the one doing the accounting or arranging to I'm the one who has reserved the services of my lawyer that I was just talking about. I'm the one who is paying for an accountant. I'm the one who is excuse me, who's coordinating with Image. I basically do all of the publicity, and I have no like, I feel fine about that, like,
Mhm.
because I am the creator and this is my baby, and it also like satisfies my the like control freak side of my personality. But all of that being said, it would be really great, I think, that like somewhere down the line,
Mhm.
having had all these experiences, it would be cool to have a relationship with an artist where we kind of decide together to create a project, and then we have those kinds of conversations about equity and sweat equity and like who
Mhm.
is responsible for what, and maybe in a sort of socialist way, like who is really good at this kind of work and who is really good at that kind of work, and like building it together. But that would kind of be like starting another small business, or this
Mhm.
is kind of like this is my safe sex is my gaby, and like I have full custody, and
Mhm.
like there's all of these like aunties and uncles that are like contributing to the growth of this gaby and making this story and this book and this IP what it is, and
Right.
then
Yeah.
deciding somewhere down the line to like breed with someone, uh, could be cool. We'll see if I get there.
Nice. All this talk of breeding, I really want to talk about the actual content of the book.
Sure,
Is that a
sure.
segue? There you
Yeah, no, it's good. I mean, there's no breeding.
go.
I'll tell you that. I
There's
am.
probably a breeding fetish buried in there somewhere, though.
I'm
Come
sure someone has a like a moo cow or hoo cow
on.
fetish in there, or like a cream pie thing happening. But I don't know if we could quite get away with that. But yeah, no, I mean, I'll tell you this sort of randomly, like one of my biggest pet peeves in fiction of all kinds, from literature to film to TV to comics to everything else, like one of my biggest pet peeves is like women only being motivated by either like protecting a child or
Mm,
grieving the death of their child or longing for a child. It's like right up there with like a woman only being motivated by having been sexually assaulted or trying to prevent herself or someone else from being sexually assaulted. And it's like yeah, like having babies, being a parent, and like sexual assault are a part of the lives of many people of all genders now and throughout history. But like those stories have been told a lot, and there it
mhm.
seems, especially with like male creators writing female characters, there's just this like huge tendency to be like, what could female interiority possibly be like?
What do women care about
What
at all? Hmm.
about babies? It's like, even if they're in fucking space, it's
Yep.
babies. So I mean, I guess you can breathe in space. In space, no one can hear you breathe.
Breed.
Anyways, so So I had an experience really early on in developing the story where I was talking to some friends about, the setup and the situation that I was imagining, and my friend was like, "Oh well, she wouldn't Avery, the sort of main character, the protagonist of safe sex protection, like, wouldn't it make sense if she was like trying to like protect her child, or trying to like rescue a child?" And I was just like, "Oh, thank you so much for reminding me of something that I'm going to create a really strong rule about, that there will be none of that in safe sex.
Nice.
Zero, not that people won't be parents, not that there won't be children, but yeah, we're not gonna have a like aliens situation where all of a sudden, like, our like strong female lead like needs to be like protecting some random baby from, an evil mother alien. That
Yeah.
will not happen. You heard it here on the
I like
Arcade
it. We have a Artgasm exclusive right here.
podcast.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's so funny because I feel like often I still at 38 years old am absolutely blown over when I feel like a piece of media actually sees me. And I hate that it's
Yeah.
still so rare that that's something that I get excited and giddy about. Like, oh, this, and I think that the representation, and sometimes representation can be as simple as, queerness or non-monogamy or race or age. There are different ways to be representative, but I think that what I like about safe sex is that it feels like it's representative of values,
Mm,
and also like my friendships, and with like my actual the characters look like people I love, but the stakes are also stakes that I care about.
yeah.
And I think it's become even more present as we, in America slip ever further towards fascism, to
Yeah, man.
see a comic book that's a bunch of queers, a bunch of queer kinky sluts battling fascism.
Yeah.
And that feels like, yeah, I live in Portland. I'm seeing that
Oh
literally
man. Oh
nightly.
fuck. Fuck.
And it's like, oh right, there it's nice to have a piece of media that understands those stakes and understands that we kinky queer sluts actually care about that, and we care about that more than we care about babies.
Yeah,
or
man, we're
or
too busy fucking fighting fascism to
yeah.
care about babies, man. That's how I feel. My point is that like that's my experience, and I would like to think that it is as legit an experience as any other, and yeah, I am more concerned with exposing and fighting fascism than I am in like nurturing. And I don't necessarily, well, but I'm very interested in nurturing friendships, and I'm very
Mhm.
interested in nurturing romantic and sexual relationships,
Mhm.
and I that we just don't have enough stories that are about that as like the the end game of a life. That's and it's not
Right.
just because like we're under duress and don't have time to do the thing that we would do if we had more leisure time. it
Mhm.
it is actually like it's those are actually our values and the stakes of our lives, and what we care about. So yeah, and totally, safe sex is a story about friendship, and I'm excited to continue to explore the
Mhm.
dynamics of all of the different friends in
Yeah, well,
the story.
it keeps on reminding me of like the idea of queer as a verb, right? Like when,
Mm,
and a lot of us, these are conversations we're always having within our groups, but you don't see those again represented in mass media a lot. But like, what does it mean to queer a friendship? What does it mean to queer a sexual relationship, and or a marriage? And it's this act of kind of taking what we are supposed to value
yeah,
and skewing that in a way where we're like, well, yeah, there are a lot of ways to love a friend, and there are a lot of ways to have a marriage, and I think it's like that constant reminder that it's this active choice to subvert the paradigm of what family and community is supposed to look like.
totally, totally, man.
Yeah, man. Word. Well, so kind of back to the original comment I was making. Like, so reading, especially like the very first episode or edition of SFXS SX Safe Sex, was this like hit of both nostalgia for the past and
Mm,
fear for the future, right?
yeah,
Like, because like living in the Bay Area and then recognizing so many of your landmarks and recognizing so many of those parties, and at the same time like living in this current world where we have this really weird kind of national relationship to sex and perversion
yeah,
that isn't quite the same as what we see in safe sex world around like, you know, the purity tests. But it does feel like this tension between like the joy of surviving in a city that feels ever increasingly less accommodating of your particular, you know, tastes, community values, and at the same time this like how do you resist that and that tension between those two? I mean, obviously you started writing this years ago. Did you feel like you were catching on with something, or like did you feel like you were trying to future cast?
I mean, I have I've said this before and it just becomes like more relevant all the time that like safe sex is is a dystopia and a satire in the sense that to me the great dystopias and the great satires really just describe the world as it already is, and then
Mhm.
just like make that visible through the story to people who might not have realized that that is the world that they're living in already, and
Mhm.
like exposes the lie that like everything's fine. It's like everything's not
Mhm.
fine. And and a lot of okay, so like the original inspiration for the world building of safe sex was a kind of a like Kafka-esque notion of the banality of evil of bureaucracy,
Mhm.
and that was inspired by me struggling with financial debt, partially student debt, and then partially credit card debt that was partially related to student debt because of like using credit cards to live and get supplies, including the supplies to live, um, while studying writing, haha,
Mhm.
and then medical bills, and like just the experience that I've had in the past decade or so of like after okay, I'll back up for a second and like talk about nostalgia first and say that like in my 20s I lived in the Bay Area and was very devoted to this like rock and roll lifestyle where my original motivation to do sex work was to have a source of income that was flexible and dynamic enough that I could do the things that I wanted to do with my life, like play in bands and ride my bike around and hang out with my friends and just live, right? And like,
Mhm.
very much like politically and culturally being like devoted to, again, kind of like with my life exposing the lie that quote unquote traditional values would like bring you satisfaction in
Mhm.
life, right? That like owning property and um like having a like heteronormative marriage and breeding and like amassing lots of stuff would be the path to happiness, right? So I like never believed in it, and like even a couple of years into being a sex worker, the the recession of, 07, 08 happened, and like, I mean, if you want a sense of like what that was like for sex workers, you can look no further than the movie Hustlers, which is a great movie that I highly recommend for lots of reasons, but one of them is that it definitely like describes like specifically like what it was
Mm-hmm.
like being a sex worker like during that economic crash. And like,
Mm-hmm.
but part of what that exposed for me, which is also extremely relevant right now, is like placing your faith in these like larger institutions of power, like financial institutions, like even educational institutions, definitely like uh like institutions of capitalism, that like if you think like, okay, as long as I like do what I'm supposed to do, then like everything will be fine, and then like everything fucking explodes in people's faces. And like to a certain degree, when you like are living outside the law, or like working in informal economies, or um like living your life sort of outside of that like heteronormative lie, that like, and this like white supremacist lie of like perfectionism, that like, you kind of, you see these like huge catastrophes, and you're like, well, at least I feel like prepared to like DIY this shit, and like
Mm-hmm.
figure this out, and like not depend on all of these systems. And so like then in my 30s, I was like, okay, I feel really solid in like living outside of society. What if I like get a really expensive master's and like take out a bunch of loans, and like really try to like join this New York rat race, and like spread my like radical ideas like wider, and find like a wider audience for them, and like participate in media, and participate in like all of these different things. And that has been very rewarding in a lot of ways, and really demoralizing in a lot of ways. And so like, and in one way that it was really demoralizing was financially, of feeling like, okay, there was this sort of promise made to me that if I invested in this grad school education, that I would be able to make enough money to pay it off, whereas in actuality I could barely make enough money to fucking live. And
Mm-hmm.
so and then I was also working essentially like part-time, managing all of my debt, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
getting customer service people on the phone, from Sally Mae and banks, and trying to, negotiate with them, like, well, maybe if you can like lower my interest rate, then this thing, and da 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 da. And I was like doing all of this, like learning about these systems by like catching up, and then like trying to like take advantage of financial coaching to like work my way out of it, and like all these different strategies. And it took up so much fucking energy, and it was like
Mm-hmm.
draining my vitality, my creative vitality. It was like definitely making me like burnt out and depressed in a way that was like affecting my libido. And that was kind of like the inspiration for this idea of like, what if, not even what if, but like what if society was like this? Like, duh, a lot of people are struggling with this, whether it
Mm-hmm.
has to do with student debt, or some other, or whether they're fucking dealing with their like immigration paperwork, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like, really dealing with bureaucracy and paperwork takes so much fucking time. And then like, do you have time then to like have joy in your life? Do you have time to like think outside the box or be creative? Do you have time to like be ambitious and like push yourself? Do you have time to have an unpaid or very like lowly paid internship in order to gain power within these systems? No. So like, I really wanted to like build a dystopia around the idea of like, how does like hegemony, like systems of power, like work within this, like through the like boredom, the
Mm-hmm.
tedium, the like time and life sucking banality of bureaucracy, and like then tying that to sexuality, because like money and sex go together for me. And like,
Mm-hmm.
how much I have time for like sexuality in my work or in my private life or my recreational life, like is totally tied into how much money I have. So like,
Mm-hmm.
that was like how I built the dystopia. And then from there, like, it's pretty effortless for me to like see the connections between like sex and money in terms of the gentrification of sex culture in San Francisco, and the way that like tech the tech industry is like whitewashing queer culture, kink culture, sex work culture in San Francisco. And like that was also like part of what I wanted, that's part of the story that I wanted to really specifically tell with Safe Sex, was like the
Mhm.
idea of like how like the disparity, the like social stratification and like wealth disparity that we see in the tech industry in San Francisco also creates like these huge like sex culture stratifications. And like
Mhm.
then how the people who get the power then also have power over the law, and have power over surveillance, and have power over policing, which is obviously something that is like more relevant now than ever. But like the policing and the like evils of the American police force is like not something new. The way that people are paying attention to it and critiquing it is like fresh in 2020. But like, you know, the movement for Black Lives and like all kinds of social movements have been critiquing how people in power the use law enforcement to make themselves feel safe at the expense of more marginalized people being made to be less safe. And like that
Mhm.
ultimately is the message of Safe Sex, which I've just talked about a bunch of like maybe really dry stuff about like money and the law and paperwork. But to just to remind people, there's also fisting and vibrators and romance and uh, friends fighting, friends making up, people jerking off,
Some great
people
outfits
drinking,
too.
yeah, great outfits, thank you, fashion, people, you know, eating, drinking coffee, smoking weed. You know, there's you know, and then like adventure and intrigue and infiltration, and you know, that was another big part of the project with with Safe Sex, was like sort of weaving all of that like political
Mhm.
subtext and messaging into a story that like ultimately is meant to like excite and entertain
Mm.
you.
Well, that's it. It's an incredibly fun book, despite how horrific it often is in places. And but I think what you're saying is so legit in that I mean, it exposes, I think, often the hypocrisy that certainly journalists and, of course, many lay people approach sex work with, which is this idea that it's like a moral issue. We talk about it from a sex issue, and we rarely talk about it from a labor issue. And the only ones who are talking about it from a labor issue tend to be current or former sex workers themselves, because they
Totally.
see like these are the actual issues that we're dealing with. And I think it's so refreshing to see kind of both, right? Like almost in that way, the strata is in Safe Sex is that the hegemony is treating it as a moral issue, and the people who are actually living it are treating it as a survival and financial issue. And there are plenty of both of those aspects woven into it. But I think that it's just helpful to be reminded. I mean, even I think in the very one of the first one or two books, they actually say like this is how we get paid, honey. Like this is why we're here.
Yeah.
Like we could be having kinky sex for free, but
Yeah.
we don't. Or we do on our own time. But the
Yeah.
reason why this space exists is so that we can get paid for it and keep doing it. And I think
Yeah.
it's just helpful to remember that, like, yes, it's all very glamorous from the outside, but it's survival. And when that survival is put at risk, it's not just the survival of any individual's sex life or pleasure. It's they're quite literal, like material survival.
Yeah. Yeah. And the glamour is part of the job. I mean, I think a lot about, you know, you talked about queer as a verb, and I think a lot about glamour as a verb, right? Like,
Mm,
definitely something that comes from like supernatural monster stories, like vampires will glamour you, right? Where
mhm,
they will like, you know, sort of cast a spell on you and like control your mind and make you think that the thing that they want is the thing that you want. And like, that's what sex workers do. But and we do it with fashion, we do it with outfits, and we do it through emotional labor, and those are our sort of like subtle fine arts, and we do it for work, and we can also use that in other situations, in other survival situations if we need to. And that was part of the project of Safe Sex, was like sort of taking that superhero idea of like every X-Men has like their own particular like power that makes them special, and then when they like need to fight for their rights or fight for their survival, they like use that power that makes them special in order to
Mhm.
in order to fight, in order to preserve the thing that they want to preserve, protect the thing that they want to protect. But they also like have that talent even when they're not fighting.
Mhm.
They have that, like it's still like a part of who they are, and that of course is like the enduring allegory of X-Men, as
Mhm.
like mutation, as like something that you can point to that is like really concrete, that's like this is something that we can explain with like some yada yada science, but like also this is who I am.
Mhm. Actually, that speaks to something that I found. I'm not going to say surprising, but kind of like refreshing in the book was reading that like homosexuality isn't banned in this world by the
Yeah,
pleasure center. There are gay bureaucrats, and it's more about self-expression that's really controlled, and sexual self-expression outside of monogamous kind of normie. And I thought that was really nice. And of course, like the head of the evil, like the arch villain is a woman. And I think that was so nice to kind of see that, like, just because, like, putting the label feminist on something doesn't actually mean that it's morally superior.
totally.
And gay people aren't always the revolutionaries that I think a lot of stories have made them and us out to be. And I like that you integrated that kind of, that the villainy can come from inside the house in some ways. Um,
Totally, that's absolutely right.
yeah, I mean, tell me about that, like that choice though, like that idea of like having the second hand be, an out proud gay man. And he has, I mean, I'm not going to spoil, but he has a little bit of a backstory that comes out in the episode around the gala that I
Yeah,
thought was really great, where it kind of shares his trauma, but at the same time, it kind of led him toward a much different path than one might expect.
totally. Yeah, of course you've picked up on some of the most uh some of the most important messages of the story, and like it's something that is like an example that's coming to mind for me is like this unfortunately like debate that does not seem to be dying just yet, of uh people who are like say that like gay pride is supposed to be like family friendly, and that you're not, that they don't want like people having public sex, and they don't want people wearing like assless leather chaps, and they don't want like sexuality to be like poked in their queer sexuality, leather sexuality, kink sexuality to be like poked in their faces like during gay pride. And that is like, I mean, my stance on that, I hope is obvious, that I think that that is counter revolutionary and bullshit, but there is a that debate, and the people who say that, it's coming from like a very real like messaging in our political landscape of like, hey, if you can figure out how to be respectable enough by our normative standards, then we'll let your perversion slide. We'll never
Mhm.
let you forget that you're a second class citizen, but we'll like let you have some rights. Which rights did you want again? Oh, marriage? We could do that. Like,
Yeah.
just make sure that you're constantly distinguishing yourselves from a like new lower class like subculture of the people who are truly sick and truly bad for society, right? So
Right.
like that is that is how I wanted to construct the villainy of Safe Sex. And like as for Dr. Powell's backstory, which you've alluded to, again, I will, not give I will not give any spoilers. Perhaps this is like light spoilers for people who want to like start the book like completely fresh. So I guess like stick your fingers in your ears um and sing like a Donna Summer song, and then and then we'll be done. But uh like there are several like all of the antagonists of Safe Sex Volume 1 Protection are people who could be allies to our heroes, but have either chosen or been forced to like side with the like assimilationist normative uh religious right organization known as the party. And so you have like some characters who have sort of like made this Faustian bargain with the party where like the party will like tacitly accept feminism as long as it's second wave and is very trans exclusionary and sex work exclusionary, right? And then like they'll tacitly the party will tacitly accept like homosexuality as long as it's homonormative, right? Like as
Mhm.
long as it's like as long as the only like civil rights battle that there is to fight for is marriage, and like once you have marriage, then it's like, oh, you also want other things? No, we're not doing that. And then there's another character who, again, this is light spoiler, but there's another character who there's a sort of conversion therapy um uh uh plot in Safe Sex that leads like one of the characters to essentially have this like almost like supernatural brainwashing level where there's like a bit of the like monstrosity um of a like a horror movie where there's like a zombie or a vampire or someone's been like body snatched by an alien or something like that, where someone like resembles the person that you used to love but like is now your enemy, you know what I mean? And
Mhm.
and in this story it is done through a like torturous conversion therapy, also known as conversion therapy. Conversion therapy is torture and should be outlawed.
Mhm.
But uh so so to sort of like compare the character who I'm like bending over backwards not to spoil anything, but to sort of like compare one character who has been like forced through torture to accept this like party line of of assimilation, and then another character who through trauma, the trauma that they have experienced as a result of like being queer, uh like that they both kind of arrive at the same place where they are like fighting on behalf of the people who like used to be their enemies and are definitely like the clear villains of the story. I kind
Mhm.
of wanted to show that there are like a lot of different ways that people can end up essentially like being turncoats for the cause of queer liberation.
Mhm.
And that we, in a way, I hope that it's a cautionary tale that is not like didactic in the sense that people feel like I'm like wagging my finger at them,
Mhm.
unless they're into that, in which case like I have a rate for that. Uh but I wanted either people to like recognize their like susceptibility to that, or also feel like validated that like when it's really like painful and frustrating that their like former comrades have like assimilated and turned against them, or people that they know could be powerful allies are against them, like that's something that like really scares me, and I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to like put into the like horror aspect of this story, is like that that feeling where you like read a like feminist, supposedly feminist op-ed about porn in the New York Times, and it's like so ill-informed and backwards about what the priorities of the people who actually like make porn and have been involved in the discourse of like what is important in terms of what we need to talk about with like porn and society and sex work and society and sexuality in general in society, and like it just how frustrating it is to be like no 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 no, like yes I believe that like sure like have this op-ed out there, except like then there's not enough space for like counter narratives, and that's
Mm-hmm.
the thing that is so frustrating, is like yeah no fuck I'll like fight to my death for your right to express your shitty opinion, to like misquote Voltaire or whatever, but like I you know I also like deserve a right to then like voice my opinion, and I am going to vent my frustration if there's not space being given um to different perspectives on that.
Mm. Mm. All right. So I'm going to move on just
Okay.
because we're almost out of time, but I loved everything you have said. And I know that we could probably talk for hours and hours and hours about this. Okay, I want to know about the future. What's going on next for Safe Sex?
Oh, I was gonna say, I'm sorry, I do not have a crystal ball, and I cannot tell you
No, please tell me everything's going to be
when we
okay.
can hug our friends again. Uh,
I miss orgies so
I
much.
know,
Tina.
I miss orgies too. I miss dance parties. Honestly, I'll
Yeah,
like
actually,
take,
yeah.
yeah, I'll take,
I don't even like dance parties that much, but I still am like, I want to do them so
yeah.
bad. But yeah, like even just like looking at some of the scenes, especially some of the flashback scenes of the I'm sorry, what's the name of the club
The
in
Dirty Mind.
the Dirty Mind? Of course, I'm so sorry. How could I
No, it's
forget?
okay.
Yeah, but seeing like the action shots of the Dirty Mind, and I just like again like not even nostalgia, just like a deep soul longing just to be in a room where I'm smelling other people's cum and sweat. I'm like,
Yeah,
wow, I didn't
yeah.
realize how bad this quarantine had been until then.
Yeah, man. I feel you. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, it's funny actually, like opening up the book and like looking at this sort of like opening monologue from Avery, and how, or this sort of like voiceover where she is actually talking nostalgically about how much she misses being in a room with her friends, like
Mm-hmm.
coming surrounded by her friends, and you know, I like wrote that with, you know, I started writing it in 2017, and like I was writing it with the intention of being like, okay, I'm writing this for a broad audience, and I want to use language, of course, combined with the imagery that, you know, is going to be made by the artist to like let people, either there's going to be like two kinds of people reading this book, right? There are people who have come in a room surrounded by their friends, and people who haven't, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so for the people who have, I, you know, like you for example, I mean, I've literally been at parties like this with you, right? And so
Yep.
like I like wanted, you know, somebody like you to be like, oh my god, I've never seen this sentiment expressed in a story before, or like I
Mm-hmm.
have not seen it expressed as much on the scale of like how important it is to my
Yeah.
life, and like
Yeah.
I've never seen imagery of it, or I haven't seen it nearly enough. More please. And by the way, like I don't want to be the only person. I want more people to be given like money and resources and platforms and great collaborators to be able to tell these stories, and I hope to help them do that. But anyway,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's the people who have never had that experience, and of course some of them will have always wanted to, and have just never made it happen. And some of them are going to be like, I never want that. And that's fine, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, for them, I wanted them to see how important that is to people and how important that is to these characters. So even if they never go to an orgy, they know what it's like to empathize with people who care about orgies. So all
Yeah.
and you know, and now this idea of like, oh, I'm so nostalgic for a time that I could like smell my friends cum. It's like, oh god, that is like taking on a whole new layer. So what is the
Yeah.
future of safe sex? The future of safe sex is that I am working on the next story arc. It is almost definitely going to not come out in single issue form. This is something that
Hmm.
we've just decided. I think I had a little bit uh, of a like prejudice against the idea of like going straight to the trade paperback, that it would be like going straight to video, which is like a bad thing to happen to movies. But like this is not a movie, and also the world is totally different. And so
Mm-hmm.
the idea of like writing a graphic novel as like the second story arc instead of writing a sort of more like serialized issue based story is really exciting, because that's like a
Mm-hmm.
new challenge for me. So we've just decided that the
Does that
story
mean you still have to hit those like every 15-page benchmarks of like on the next time we see our fateful characters, or do you actually get to just kind of blow past those and go straight to a full paperback length
That is
story
a
wise?
great question that is a great question that only another writer would ask. Um, and the answer is that I can do whatever I want, but kind of like what we were talking about in the beginning of the podcast, like that that kind of freedom can be like a fucking prison in your own mind,
Right.
right?
Right.
Whereas structure can actually be liberating. So,
Mm-hmm.
I think that what I am gonna try to do is like write chapters of the novel, you know, think of it as a graphic novel, think of it as a cohesive whole instead of like a serialized story that is then meant to be collected and read as a whole. And kind of write chapters in a similar structure to how I wrote the issues, um still in script form, of course, and still working with Jen Hickman and now as the series artist, and Lauren McCubbin as the designer and editor. And but you know, it does mean that like if I get to like an issue of a comic book is, you know, there's variations, but like the sort of standard is 22 pages, right? So I've been working
Mm-hmm.
in this like 22 page, you know, 4 to 7 issue um structure. And so now it's like I have a little bit of wiggle room. And as much as I enjoyed writing issue based scripts and kind of, you know, with the needs of cliffhangers and the needs of like also, you know, figuring out creative expository moments where you kind of have to have like people in the beginning of an issue being like, remember what we're fighting about? Like, yes, I do, and I will now repeat it, but in a way that is not boring for you if you have been following along. Like
Right.
that's fun, but it's also
Mm-hmm.
kind of nice to think that I might not need to take up as many pages or as much energy with that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and yeah, so and the other thing that I can say at this point is that there will be two elements involved that I can say for sure. One of them is sex robots, and the other is incels. So like
Oh God.
that's what I'll say, and I'll tell you that the working title is Terms of Service.
Nice. Nice.
And I think that we're gonna kickstart it. And I
Oh.
actually just had a good conversation with someone at Image about kind of like how that works on the back end with
Mm.
with fulfillment. Again, stuff that maybe if you're not a I don't know. I feel like a lot of people listening to this are creators who are interested
Oh
in
yeah.
in this kind of stuff, and or are, you know, fans who might actually be interested in the behind the scenes of the unglamorous work of you know, stamps.com. But anyway, yeah, you know, their image is, again, like really flexible and willing to be like, hey, you know, um if you're gonna fund this so that you can pay yourself and pay the artists, and, you know, also maybe like pay to have like special rewards and all of that kind of thing, then we can, you know, kind of work it into the budget
Mhm.
to make it so that the books that they publish can be the rewards. And so we're like
Nice.
kind of working out all of that stuff, so I'm excited about it. And, you know, the idea, I mean, you've done Kickstarters, like the idea
Hmm.
of like also kind of building a community around the book through funding it is exciting to me, because I, you know, I've funded Kickstarters before where it's like I not only want to like pledge to support this person's work, but I also just kind of want to like, this is, I'm essentially pre-ordering it and then
Yeah.
also being able to like sort of opt in to like hear updates on like the development of the project. And I
Hmm.
feel like that is, you know, there's a lot of shitty things about the modern world and how art is funded or not. But I do think that that model is an exciting one, and that I'm stoked to kind of like develop that campaign. So, you know, maybe if you have any tips on that,
Oh my God. Yeah, we can talk about that for sure.
love to hear them. So,
Yeah,
so
totally.
that's what's going on with that. And then I did like every other schmuck. I did hire a manager and an agent to develop the series for TV, and I,
Woohoo.
you know, downloaded a final draft and am like teaching myself to do script writing with that software. And you know, I'm excited to both develop safe sex the right way, because as I have mentioned ad nauseum, it is my
Mhm.
gaby, and I will not be turning over custody of my gaby to just anyone. But
Mhm.
I'm excited to develop that, and then I'm also excited to I don't know what the equivalent is with this allegory, but like, I don't know, babysit, like like babysit like somebody else's intellectual property. And like, you know, I'm excited to like write for TV and film,
Yeah.
and even other comics, where I'm not writing my own IP that I'm incredibly precious
Yeah.
about, and like,
I think that means
you
it
know,
makes you like an uncle or an auntie or something.
exactly, exactly. I'm excited to flex my auntie muscles with like somebody else's IP, and, you know, learn more about the craft of writing fiction and writing for mass entertainment, and writing for TV and writing in scripts and all that stuff, and collaborate with different people in different ways. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm yeah, I'm excited for Project Tina Takes Tinseltown, and I guess there's a lot of Zoom pitch meetings in my future,
Oh
which is
wow, yeah.
unfortunate, because you know, I do a lot of my best mind control in person, but I guess I'm just gonna have to learn how to bend people to my will through the computer.
I was gonna
Um,
say at least in this way you don't have to wear pants, but I feel like so much of your mind control didn't involve pants in the first place.
it's true, but now I can wear like much softer, comfier, uh, like non pants. I can wear like unwashed, stained like cotton booty shorts instead of French lingerie. So,
There
um,
we go.
yeah.
See, there are upsides to this after all.
Yes, exactly. That's the no pants is a. I am not one of those people that is like, well, I need to get up and get dressed as if I'm leaving the house, like before I like sit down at my desk or take a Zoom call. I am completely like, no way, man. Like putting in the same scrunchie and wearing the same
Mhm.
romper that I did yesterday, and that's actually like a perk for me. But
Yeah, I actually feel like this has been great for my own. Like I have insecurities about not wearing makeup out of the house or not wearing a bra out of the house,
yeah.
and those insecurities are a distant memory now. Like no problem, braless and makeupless going to the dog park. Not a problem, even in the least. So
Hell yeah.
thank you, COVID, for that at least.
Yeah, thanks for nothing except maybe that.
Yeah.
Now that we've learned that lesson, please give us our orgies back. Thank
Yes,
you
exactly.
very
Yes, we will.
much.
Yes, perfect. I like it.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool. So, we can buy your books anywhere, but probably comic book stores are the best place, huh?
Yeah, the thing that is really cool about having this trade paperback out is that it is also in regular schmegula bookstores. So
Nice.
whereas like with the single issue comics, you had to go to a comic book store or various kinds of stores that sell comic books, which of course I want people to support and check out and you can get Safe Sex Volume 1 Protection, the trade paperback collection of the first 7 issues at comic book stores for sure. And I want people to, definitely endorse people calling their local comic book store and asking about it and ordering it through them. Comic book stores are struggling just like all other retailers and all other humans and entities right now. So like supporting them, I promise they have like a system of curbside pickup or social distancing ordering, and they will be happy to hear like what people are really interested in right now. And that's also really helpful to me and my team as indie creators through Image, because when people show interest in the book, then retailers order more copies of the book, and then the publishers know that there is interest in it, and it's all interconnected. um, but you can do that with your local bookstore as well now, with the comic, and that's even with the trade paperback of the comic, which is even more important because that way booksellers can also know that there is an interest in in this little indie graphic novel as well. And it is available through our overlords if that is uh, a retail experience that is most accessible or feels safest to you at this point. But I do want to encourage people to kind of think outside the box in terms of patronizing their local books and comic book stores, because they need your help now more than ever.
Yeah, mutual aid. Yeah, yeah.
Hell yeah.
So, drop your social medias links, please.
Totally. So I am on Twitter and Instagram at Tina Horns Ass. That's TINAHORNSASS. My website is tinahorn.net. I have an awesome Ho friend who is working on a redesign of that website, which is a little stale. So I'm excited to have a relaunch of that site, which will basically just be all the same information, but in a slightly prettier and easier to read fashion. So that'll be happening soon. And yeah, that's where I am. And then Wire People Into That is my sex, kink, gender, and love podcast that is also indie, and I've been doing it for 7 years. Allison Moon was my guest many years ago, and we talked about pegging.
Oh God, it feels like a million years ago.
Yeah, that
I mean,
episode
not
continues
pegging.
to
Pegging
be
still
well. No,
part of my
pegging
life.
is very relevant. Yeah, that episode is very popular. I mean, I think people are interested in what you have to say, and I also think it's a nice concrete thing that people want to click on. They're like, pegging.
Yeah.
I've heard of that. I want to know more. And you're certainly the person to hear about it from. So.
Oh, thank you. Well, I do, and also just kind of for those listening now, I would like to doubly endorse Why Are People in That? Actually, kind of in conjunction with Safe Sex, because if you see anything in the comic book where you're like, why would people be into that? Well, Tina Horn just happens to have a podcast about probably almost everything that's in the comics so far that I've read, where you can actually learn about people's interest in those kinks and topics. Because I think it's just a great, like, I'm as a sex educator, and I'm sure you experience this too. Like, I am kind of, and I won't say this necessarily as publicly, but like I'm kind of tired about just like blowjobs 101. You know, like I'm tired of
Oh
teaching those
yeah.
workshops. I'm tired of that being the level that the discourse is really at these days. Like this is why I like art, like I do Artgasms. Like I want to have bigger conversations about how sex is part of our culture, and I feel like Why Are People Into That is a great way for people to access that too, where it's like you're having some seriously complex high level conversations about pleasure and a lot of things associated with pleasure in a way that I think is really just it's refreshing, and it's I feel like it raises my own intellectual understanding of sexuality, where it's easy for me to get kind of cynical about it these days, that I feel like, oh no, like I can definitely expand my own horizons in a way that feels really accessible and fun. And for me, like I still get those moments of squick here and there throughout my life where I'm like, oh wait, I'm curious about this now. Why are people into that? And there we go. You've got a
Well, I
podcast right
love the idea of replacing like a feeling of being squicked out with a feeling of curiosity,
there. Oh,
and that is, yes, that is my project as a public intellectual. So
yeah.
I'm thank you for that wonderful
Yeah.
endorsement, and that means a lot to me. And I'll tell you, man, I'm with you. I feel like surely we must be past like use lube and use your words and go slow, like, but the fact that people aren't, like, I don't want to be snooty about that, but
Mhm.
I definitely feel like there is a certain amount of like, why don't you catch up to us?
Right.
And I'll tell you, without getting into specifics, I mean, like you mentioned that there's like tons of like stuff in safe sex that people might not have seen before, that they might want to listen to my podcast to learn more, and I certainly hope that they do. But some of the stuff that we had to wrangle with some censorship about was like literally people using vibrators like while having intercourse, like,
Wow.
and to me, I'm just like, what? Like, what?
Can you actually share the anecdote that you shared at FlameCon last year? I'm not sure if like around the kind of way you worked around censorship was involving
Oh
like
yeah. Oh God, totally. Lord, I forgot about this. So yeah, there's a scene in, um actually, I can tell you, I can give you the update
oh
on that
nice.
story. Okay, so the story is that there is a panel in safe sex. It is in issue 1, and it's a panel where um two people are having um uh they're having sex, and they're having penetrative sex. It's unclear whether it's anal or another hole, and the gender of both people is unclear, which deliberately, like, they're deliberately
Mhm.
androgynous in the true sense of the word. And there's Avery, the main character, who is a queer pornographer, is filming them. So there's an element of sex work and pornography like being made within the panel. And then the bottom in the panel is using a vibrator to is to what do people use vibrators for? This person is incorporating a vibrator into the sex that they're having, right? And so this was a panel that um uh I don't need to like disparage anybody. I'll just say that it was not anybody at Image, and not any of my current collaborators, but someone who was at one point involved in the um, development of the project, asked us to take this panel out. And so, my editor at the time and I were like, okay, um, this we don't love this note. However, we can take this note in good faith and say, how can we make this panel less explicit but just as subversive, or maybe even more subversive, right? um and it I a friend of mine also like reminded me of this story from the that Helena Bonham Carter tells in the like DVD commentary of the movie Fight Club, where like there's originally a line where she says, after sex, she says, "I want to have your abortion," and the studio was like, "She can't say that." So they were like, "Okay, well, why don't we just replace it with an equally, uh, offensive, provocative, whatever word you want to use, line, and see if they object to that." And so they changed it to, "I haven't been fucked like that since grade school," and they were like, "That's fine."
Jesus Christ.
Right? So, like, just as an example of like, sometimes when the powers that be like give you a note or try and like ask you to change your work, you can actually just change it to something that in your mind is like no less like explicit or subversive or provocative or potentially offensive, but they just like kind of want to feel like they've like marked their territory, right? So
Mm-hmm.
anyway, so we my editor and I, this is one of the many benefits of having a queer editor, working to advocate for you and your vision. We were like, okay, well, what can we have instead? And I was like, okay, well, let's use the like heteronormative imagination against these people and have something that like you and I like recognize as super sexy, but that like like a conventional person like with conventional taste like might not see as like sexual at all. And I was like, well, okay, well, what about trampling? Like, what if we have a like leather daddy and like a super like fetish decked out dom like trampling someone instead, and that that'll be the scene, and there's like no like nudity, and there's no like penetration, and there's no like sex toys, but like people will appreciate it. And then my editor was like, well, also like, what was it his idea or mine? I don't remember. Anyway, then there was like the added layer of like, oh well, and what if the person being trampled is a cop? And we were like, yes, let's do it. And so we put that in there, and they were like, this is fine, this is great. So that then we ended up actually not having to change that panel. So that panel is in the book. You can see it in volume 1 protection, the trade paperback. But then what we ended up doing with that image that Michael Dowling, the artist, who worked on the first few issues, did actually end up drawing, is that we put it in another scene where you see porn playing in the background. I'm going to flip through and try to, I think it's it must be the end of issue 4. Yeah, the end of issue 4, there's porn playing in the background of a torture scene, and you can see that image, and you can actually even see the echo of that same image of Avery filming it. So that's actually like another thing that we decided to do in the final version, that kind of just like brought that whole, I mean, I guess it's like a parable of how to like take sexual censorship and just really try to like warp it in order to get what you wanted in the first place.
Well, I think it's also an object lesson that apparently the powers that be think that trampling a cop is no less, or is actually far less problematic than using a vibrator during partnered sex. So, use that information as you will, listeners. That's
Dude, totally.
certainly something.
Yeah, the vibrate. I mean, I will tell you that there was a point where I was like, I will totally roll with a bunch of different notes. Like, that is absolute. I will find a way to like tell the story that I want to tell and be like true to my cultures and like true to my politics, but like I am going to die on Vibrator Hill. And I did. I mean, I died and then was reanimated on Vibrator Hill. So that's where you can find me.
Beautiful. Oh my God, what a beautiful button to end this episode. Tina Horn, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you for telling that extra little bonus anecdote. I appreciate that. It's always a delight, and I wish all the best for you and your future creative endeavors.
Thank you so much. Likewise, Allison Moon.
And that's it for this week's episode of the Artgasm Podcast. Thank you, as always, for listening. One little side note that I just wanted to add to this interview is that after I interviewed Tina, I actually went ahead and watched Being John Malkovich. I'm working on a play right now that has a lot to do with philosophy of mind. And so it was the kind of perfect movie to rewatch that I hadn't seen since it came out back in, I think, 99 or 2000. And I have to say, and I texted Tina as soon as I watched it because I was so surprised and impressed with how it kind of quote unquote holds up. But even more so, Tina responded with like, it's a lot queerer than you remember, huh? And I remembered there being a, quote, like lesbian subplot, but now in the years ensuing, as we understand kind of trans narratives more, and as we understand just genderqueer identity more, I loved that this movie kind of feels like it spoke to this genderqueerness that really didn't have language for it at that point when it was filmed. And I think that's a pretty impressive move, I have to say. And just really like even early on at the very beginning when Cameron Diaz goes into John Malkovich's brain for the first time and comes out saying that she believes that she's a transsexual, which is the word she uses at the time, because that was the word that we had at the time. And then from then on, Catherine Keener's character actually refers to Cameron Diaz as him, like correctly pronouns Cameron Diaz's character out of the gate, which I did not catch back when this movie came out. And I was so impressed by that move. It was a cool moment and then again, the movie gets even queerer as it starts to kind of deconstruct identity. So I'm going to talk about that more on a Patreon only episode in the near future, but I just thought I wanted to poke at that and say, like, if you haven't seen Being John Malkovich since it came out, I highly recommend checking it out because it is, as Tina said, queerer than I remembered. All right. So with that, I'm going to just let you go. But thanks, as always, for joining me. Please do check out Tina's social media links, and please do read her book. It's really special. It's really important. You can also find me on all the things, like I said, Hey Ellie Moon on Twitter or at artgasmcast.com. And, of course, supporting me on Patreon is the best way of doing it, and that's patreon.com/artgasm. Until next time, bye-bye.